It's fascinating when you stop thinking about history just as dates and places and really consider how people actually moved around, how they got from A to B.
Oh, absolutely, especially across water. And we've been looking at this really interesting new study. It sort of challenges the standard picture of travel between Denmark and Norway way back in the Bronze Age.
Right, because the accepted idea for a long time has been that all those cultural connections we see, similar artifacts, burial customs, even architecture.
Yeah, the styles are remarkably similar in places.
Exactly. All that came from people taking this really long coastal route, like hugging the coast of Denmark and then Sweden. What is it, about 700 kilometers?
Something like that, yeah. A long haul, definitely the safer seeming option.
But this new research, it's from the University of Gothenburg, just published April 2nd, 2025 in PLOS ONE. It suggests something much bolder.
It does. Bull Binkson and her colleagues are proposing a potential shortcut. A direct open sea route.
Over 100 kilometers straight across the Skagerrak Strait? That sounds quite different.
Very different. So our mission today really is to dig into the evidence for this. What does this study actually show? And what does it tell us about what Bronze Age people were capable of at sea?
Okay, but first let's just acknowledge the traditional view isn't baseless, right? The archaeology does show strong links.
Oh, definitely. The cultural similarities are undeniable, and interaction is the obvious explanation. The real question this new study raises is how that interaction happened. Was it only via that long coastal slog?
So how do you even test something like a prehistoric sea voyage across open water? You can't exactly observe it.
Right, and this is where it gets clever. They didn't just look at artifacts, they built a tool. A computer modeling tool specifically designed to simulate ancient maritime journeys.
Okay, like a virtual test environment.
Pretty much, yeah. Think of it as running experiments, but all inside a computer based on what we know about the conditions back then.
So what kind of data goes into this simulation?
Well, you need the environmental stuff. So things like the typical sea currents in the Skagerrak during that period, prevailing wind patterns, wind speeds.
Okay.
And then, crucially, you need data on the vessel. How would a specific type of Bronze Age boat actually move in those conditions? How fast could it go? How did wind affect it?
And they had a specific boat in mind for this.
They did. They based their simulations on reconstructions of the Hjortspring boat.
Ah, the Hjortspring boat. That's that amazing find, isn't it? The big paddle-driven canoe from Denmark around 350 BCE.
Exactly. It's remarkably well preserved, so it gives us a really good insight into the kind of large canoes they were capable of building later in the Iron Age, which informs potential Bronze Age capabilities too. It's a solid starting point.
Okay, so they plugged the Hjortspring boat data into their virtual Skagerrak environment.
Yeah.
And what did the simulation spit out?
The results were, pretty compelling. They suggested that, yes, direct open sea travel from Denmark to Norway was likely possible, feasible even during the Bronze Age.
Wow. Okay. Possible. But under what conditions? I mean, it still sounds way riskier than just keeping land in sight.
Definitely riskier.
Yeah.
The model indicated some key things would be needed. First, the boats themselves. They'd need to be reasonably seaworthy, probably able to handle waves up to, say, a meter high.
Okay, not insignificant.
No. And handle winds maybe around 10 knots. But just as important would be the human element. You'd need pretty good weather forecasting skills, knowing when it was safe to go.
And navigation, presumably, out of sight of land.
Absolutely. Strong navigational skills would be essential. And the study also suggests these kinds of voyages were probably, seasonal, most likely limited to the summer months when conditions tend to be calmer.
Right, which contrasts sharply with the coastal route.
Exactly. That coastal route, while much, much longer, we're talking maybe weeks of travel, right?
Right.
With lots of stops for supplies and rest. It offered safety. You're always near land. You can pull ashore easily if the weather turns bad. And you could probably do it almost year-round, maybe avoiding the worst of winter.
So safer, maybe more reliable for bulk transport or regular trips, but incredibly time-consuming.
Precisely. The open sea route is faster, more direct, but carries significantly more risk and requires more specific conditions and skills.
Now here's a detail from the study that really jumped out at me. They mentioned archaeological evidence suggesting that people were already making regular open sea crossings in the Skagerrak way earlier.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Including stretches where you'd be out of sight of land for maybe 50 kilometers. And this potentially started as early as 2300 BC.
That's what some of the archaeological interpretations suggest, yes. Which is, much earlier than the Hjortspring boat itself.
So does that mean the model using the Hjortspring boat is maybe not the full picture for the earlier Bronze Age?
Well, it's a limitation they acknowledge. They use the Hjortspring boat because it's well documented. But a really important aspect of their research, as they point out, is the tool itself.
The modeling software.
Exactly. They emphasize that this modeling approach is adaptable. You could, in theory, plug in data for different types of vessels, even earlier ones, if we had enough information about how they were built and how they performed.
Okay, so it opens the door to studying even earlier seafaring possibilities, if the evidence for those boats turns up.
Precisely. It's a framework for future research, too.
So let's sort of wrap this up. The main takeaway here isn't that everyone suddenly abandoned the coastal route, right?
No, not at all. That coastal route was likely still very important, probably the default for many journeys, the safer bet.
But this study strongly suggests that Bronze Age people, maybe even quite early on, had the skills and the technology, the boats, the navigation know-how to make these more direct open-sea voyages possible?
Yes, it adds another dimension to their maritime capabilities. And that possibility of more direct, faster contact could certainly help explain those strong shared cultural traits we see between Denmark and Norway.
It paints a picture of Bronze Age societies that were perhaps more interconnected and more daring seafarers than we sometimes assume.
I think that's fair to say, yeah. It challenges us to think beyond just the safest routes.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How technology today, like this kind of sophisticated computer modeling, keeps allowing us to revisit the past and ask new questions. It changes our perspective on what ancient people could actually do.
It does.
Makes you wonder, what other assumptions that we hold about the past, about ancient limitations, might get completely overturned by the next new approach or the next piece of technology? Something to think about.